Hello everyone and welcome to another video, and for this one I'm very excited. The Oscars award ceremony is coming up, and for the last few years I've been trying to watch as many of the nominated movies as possible before that date so that I can talk about them in a couple of podcasts that I participate in. And I thought it could be fun to bring them up in the context of this channel and try and give it a bit of a storytelling narrative spin. For those of you who don't know me or are new to the channel, my name is Marina and I'm a storytelling teacher, a writer, and an aspiring author. Stories are basically my love language. They are everything to me. I breathe stories, and that's the thing that I'm the most passionate about in this world. And thanks to this sort of challenge that I've been doing in the past few years, I've been able to discover a lot of movies that I wouldn't have approached otherwise, and I found the experience to be really enriching. That being said, I didn't want to come here to whine about the movies that didn't work for me. I wanted to enhance the positives of the ones that did work. So if you find that I'm not talking about some of your favorites or movies that really impressed you this year, that's probably because I didn't connect with them so much on a personal level. I didn't vibe with them, or they're just not my style. That would be the case with Sinners, for example, where while I can see the value in the movie, I'm not a huge fan of horror, and so I end up not enjoying the movie as much as I could enjoy other genres. Same thing with Weapons, they're just not my style, so I would not classify them as my favorite, even though I could see why they are nominated in certain categories or why other people would love them. But in this particular case, I wanted to talk about my favorite ones and try and analyze or understand from a storytelling point of view why I love them so much. I'm going to try and be brief about it. I am not famous for my ability to be brief, but I will try my best, and because there is a lot of movies that I want to talk about. That being said, I will not be giving any context in terms of synopsis, cast, or directors, or any other technical or production detail, because I think that I cannot really add any value in that regard that you wouldn't be able to get by just Googling the movie, but I will leave the links to each one of them as well in the description box. Let's go! I'm already talking too much, not about movies. Train Dreams and a Giant Tiny Story. Train Dreams is the perfect example of the kind of movie that makes me feel so happy that I'm doing this sort of challenge for the past 6 or 7 years. It's a movie that probably wouldn't have sparked my curiosity if it wasn't for this. And it's also probably my second favorite of this year. So that's why it's so magical that you end up bumping into things that you did not expect to love so much. Train Dreams is a masterclass on how to make the story of a person who is not all that relevant to the world matter so much to the viewer that you end up feeling all the feelings with the main character. You end up finding that plot that is rather simple like an epic. This is a quiet main character who is not all that expressive and who shares very little about his life. And despite all of those challenges, the beauty of the visuals and the way it takes its time to take you with him in his journey, the magic of having the patience to follow him along and construct this life that could be perceived as irrelevant, but at the end of the day, he's just like the rest of us. Most of us are not that significant to the world as a whole, but to us, our stories are everything. So the way it's constructed visually, through the beautiful landscapes, through the flawless cinematography, the performance of Joel Edgerton, everything adds up to this story that could be minuscule, but ends up feeling as gigantic as life itself, because for someone, it is their life. Two people exchanging saliva and the construction of a complex world through very simple rules. Two People Exchanging Saliva is a short movie that lasts about 30-something minutes. So it's playing a bit of a difficult game because it's a bit too short to do a proper world building like a longer movie would be able to do. But it doesn't get to skip steps like a very short movie would do. So the very clever thing that it does in order to introduce you into this strange world that is very similar but also very different to our one is by establishing two main rules that I'm not going to mention in case you haven't watched it, but if you haven't, you should go ahead and watch it if you can, that completely change the game. These are a human physical interaction that is forbidden and the way transactions work in this world. And those two things seem very simple, but they change the way everything works in this little universe completely. It has absolutely nothing to do with how we live our lives in our world. To me, that feels like a real lesson on how to, just by tweaking a couple of things, a couple of details about our world, you can create this whole other different environment that feels very different and that has very different consequences, and the people in it live very different lives because of that. And so I think a good storytelling exercise would be to think about your own two different rules that are not the same as the ones in this short movie, to try and create a world of your own just by tweaking two little things. Marty Supreme and unleashing chaos for entertainment. Something brilliant that Marty Supreme does, among many other things. I was coming into this movie with not a lot of hope because I'm not the biggest fan of Timothée Chalamet. I saw the trailer and I wasn't sold on it, but after watching it, I couldn't help but thinking that it manages the pace incredibly well. It's really well directed, and obviously the performances are all awesome, but the thing where I think it stands out the most is that things totally get out of hand in Marty Supreme, but you don't jump from level 1 insanity to level 100 insanity. You have several in-between steps that make it very believable. So you can start with something silly happening to you, with like when you run into your neighbor or something like that, and you can end up with cars actually exploding. But if you don't create a proper journey between point A and point B, it's going to feel very unrealistic, and the viewer is going to have a harder time accepting that jump. But in this case, it's a very frantic movie. You are taken around by Marty, the character played by Timothée Chalamet, in a way that things just kind of happen to him in absurd ways. He causes other absurd things to happen to other characters and to himself, and everything starts piling up until it becomes this like insane snowball of events that become uncontrollable and end up exploding on everybody's face. Blue Moon and the perfect use of space. Blue Moon feels like a play put on the big screen, and it makes all the sense if you think about the prominence of the character in real life's musical theater. But sometimes this kind of more theatrical movies can feel a little bit stiff in the way that you can almost see the character looking on a stage on like an actual theater, instead of this illusion of a real actual tangible space that a movie, when it does its job well, will offer the viewer, and that makes you feel like you are physically in that spot with the characters. But in this case, there's something really clever about the way that the character played by Ethan Hawke moves around the bar, because the whole time he does not move from the bar, but he like moves from a table to the bar to talk to the waiter, and then he moves to a closet where people put their store away their jackets. He goes up the staircase back to the entrance hall, but the whole time he does not move from this area that could perfectly fit on a theater stage. The camera work in this movie is so excellent that every time the character moves to one of these little micro spots, the whole scene seems to change. There's so much care to the way it's handled, in the way that when he's sitting at the table, he's focused on one character, the writer. When he's at the bar, he's focused on the waiter. When he is turning around to the piano, he's talking just to the pianist. When he's talking to the character played by Andrew Scott at the staircase or at the entrance hall, we always get this feeling of a transition, which is the thing that the two characters are going through in their relationship. His moment with the character played by Margaret Qualley is inside the closet, which makes us think that their relationship is something secret, something that shouldn't be shared, and a relationship that at the end of the day brings shame and embarrassment to his character. Frankenstein and the depth of a close-up performance. We could talk hours and hours about Frankenstein and about all the details, the production design, the makeup and hairstyle, the costumes, the performances. But to me, what stood out the most was Jacob Elordi's outstanding performance as the creature. This is a very, very difficult character to portray, and he did an amazing job. I think the merit in this case is shared between his performance and the camera work, where in a lot of cases we can see from such a close distance to his face and his facial expressions everything that this creature, that this monster is feeling. Obviously, you wouldn't get anything valuable from that if the performance itself wasn't great, but it does feel like it was in this really brave close-ups where you could see the complexity of the character, the complexity of his feelings, opposite to what his creator Frankenstein thinks about him as a simple creature that cannot really feel the way we feel. Now he interacts with the rest of the characters and the rest of the actors, especially in his very intimate scenes with Mia Goth. Hamnet and the construction of tragedy. What am I going to teach anyone about tragedy that William Shakespeare hasn't already? It feels very meta, but I couldn't stop thinking while watching Hamnet how interesting it is that the main event of the movie is something that we already know when we walk into the theater. And most people in the world know the play that it inspired, or at the very least the important plot points, or the many other stories that it has inspired, from The Lion King to Sons of Anarchy. And yet that event happens really, really late in the movie, and that is exactly why it strikes you so hard. Because you've learned so much about the characters, you've learned so much about their story, about their relationship before that happens, that even though you know what's coming, you can't help but suffering just as much as they do. And that's why, trying to avoid any spoilers, the scene at the theater hits so hard. At least me, I was a human bucket of tears in that moment. And even though this level of tragedy is so huge that it's actually become eternal, the collective nature of the experience turned into theater, turned into play, turned into a book, turned into a movie, makes it something that at some point feels like you will be able to contain and won't be able to destroy you anymore. If I had legs, I'd kick you, and the art of making a satisfying climax after a never-ending chain of suffering. This was a movie that felt very difficult to watch. The form, the tone, the performances, the editing, the pacing, everything felt like it was trying to make you feel as stressed out, as empty inside, and as anxious as the character of Rose Byrne feels during the movie. So it's a challenge. It's not a satisfying experience watching this movie. It's not one of those cases of I'm going to sit down and I'm going to happily be entertained and see what it brings me. This movie makes you work. It makes you earn the satisfaction that it brings at the end without spoiling anything. It makes you work hard. It makes you endure, obviously not as much as the character herself, but it makes you endure a lot as a viewer. And if you persist, then you do get rewarded. It's a very interesting and very bold series of choices for a director to make, and I really, really admire how daring she was to do this. Elio and daring to treat children like smart little people. Breaking news, children are not stupid. They're just people in miniature size. I'm sure when you were a kid, you were constantly thinking, why do adults think I'm stupid? I totally understand what they're trying to say to me, even though they think I can't possibly understand it. A lot of movies for children seem to be thinking that their audience cannot process complex emotions, and that is not true. Kids are really, really clever and really, really sharp. I said this before, but I think kids are objectively smarter than adults. Obviously, they lack the life experience to be able to understand those complex feelings in the same way an adult would. But that doesn't mean they don't have those feelings and they don't experience those complexities that we also experience as adults. Elio does a wonderful thing, in my opinion, which is to show us that sometimes kids have a really, really hard time. It does not sugarcoat it, and it does not try and make it look like a tiny little problem for a tiny little person. There were a couple of scenes in Elio that felt very touching because you could see that this kid, even though he's not showing it the way an adult would, he's suffering from very deep problems that affect him to his core. And the way he reacts might be a bit silly and a little bit childish because he is a child, but the fact that they've created a character that is confronted with this kind of situation that sadly a lot of kids have to deal with in real life feels very valuable. K-pop demon hunters and the power of embracing your shadows instead of fighting them. What am I going to say about K-pop demon hunters that has not been said already? This is an awesome movie with amazing music, somewhat conventional in its structure, but there is a key moment in this story where in most cases we would go on a different direction towards the light, but in this case we just move further or deeper into the shadows of a character, and I thought that was awesome. I must admit, I am a sucker for this kind of thing. I'm still angry that we didn't get Dark Rey in Star Wars Episode 9. But I thought it was a pretty fresh take and a very good message to try and use those alleged shadows or those things that make us weird or that make us strange to others or make us different, and not just rely on the shinier parts of us to compensate those darker bits, but to actually lean into the darkness, because it's also part of us and it makes us cool and interesting and mysterious. But they are also part of life and they essentially make us what we are. Little Amélie and the complexity of being a baby. I already kind of mentioned this when I was talking about Elio and how kids are not simple, they're just little. But I think little Amélie, or the character of Rain, is a great example of how a quiet person does not necessarily have a quiet mind. In fact, a lot of them have a very, very interesting inner world. And I've never quite seen at this level and with this much focus the world seen from a perspective of essentially a baby who understands the world in such a particular way. Very, very visually beautiful movie as well. A simple accident and the ability to turn horrifying events into absurd comedy. What can we do when life is shit? In my opinion, to laugh about it is usually the best solution. The perfect balance that this movie achieves between silly comedy, really dark events, and how they meet in the middle for dark comedy is just brilliant. And how the same actors performing the same character the same way throughout the whole movie, because they are nothing if not consistent, can make you feel so different in different parts of the story. The Lost Bus and the chilling marvel of visual effects. This is a movie with a pretty conventional structure, with satisfying performances, with an okay screenplay. What really turns it into a remarkable piece is these visual effects that make you feel like you are in the fire. I particularly am not a person who cares that much about how good the CGI is or how believable the visuals are, but in this case it really made a difference between a movie that could potentially leave you a bit indifferent and an absolutely immersive experience that ironically gave me shivers. Kokuho and the ambition to turn a life into an epic. The plot in this movie covers decades of a person's life, and while the structure and the pace I wouldn't say are perfect, in terms of how engaging it feels and how much it hooks your attention, it keeps it. But something that I found really cool about this movie is that it's not afraid of showing you that time truly heals everything, and something that was important for the characters a decade ago is now absolutely forgotten, absolutely forgiven, and everyone's moved on. And that is something that you kind of need to do if you want to cover almost the entirety of a person's life in just the one movie. Because life is like that. There are things that mattered to us 10, 20 years ago that now we don't even remember. And instead of trying to give the audience an easier, more conventional, more satisfying way of delivering the facts, Kokuho chooses a more realistic way of dealing with problems and with experiences that I couldn't help but think was very, very true to the way life actually is. Jane Austen's period drama, and a topic so serious that the only way to talk about it is by making fun of it. This is another short movie, and in my opinion, it was hilarious. It was very wholesome and very well created in every aspect of it. And even though there was a lot of characters in it, I couldn't stop thinking that it was basically one person's brain where there's this voice saying, oh no, you're going to be criticized about this. The other one was thinking, that can't be so serious. Nobody's taking it as seriously as you think they are. There's another voice saying, okay, calm down. We need to approach this in a calm way. But more than anything, it felt very refreshing because it was talking about something as normal as a period in a way that I think it should be always treated, which is, yeah, it's something serious. Yeah, it's something that happens, but you know what? Why is it such a big deal? Let's just talk about it openly and like normal people instead of being outraged about everything related to it and feel shame and feel embarrassment or disgust or all of this stupid reactions to something that is just biological. That is all I have to say for today. I hope you enjoyed this different kind of video. If you did, please let me know in the comments. If I missed any of your favorite movies that are nominated for this Oscars or any other movie that didn't even make it to the nominations or to the shortlist, please let me know. I would love to check them out. And if you agree or disagree with any of the arguments that I exposed today, I would also love to know about that. Also, I'm curious, do you follow the Oscars? Is this something that only me and a bunch of old people do at this point in life? Maybe it's something that is a bit outdated now. I don't know. I really like the award format because it feels like an event. Also, I live in Spain, so that means I have to stay up all night to watch the ceremony, and it makes it, honestly, it's a little bit painful, but you know, it's like a fun little thing that I do once a year, and yeah, it's cool. Thank you so much for watching. It was lovely having you here, and I will see you next time.